Duncan Smith. Louise Gleich is the author of the report from the Centre for Social Justice, and she joins me now in the studio. Louise, thank you for coming in. Cuckooing, what is it? Because I wasn't aware of that term until I started to look into it for this show. Tell us what it is.
Yes, it's actually a really descriptive name for what happens as a cuckoo comes and takes over the nest of another bird and kicks out the occupants or the eggs. So we use it to describe the situation where criminals take over someone's home. Now, they might do that through manipulation, by befriending someone, sort of grooming them and working their way into the home, or they might do it straight out with threats and violence. And when they do, they take over the home and they use it for their own criminal purposes. So that could be for drug dealing, but not necessarily. It could be for prostitution. It could be for some other kind of criminal purpose.
And in terms of your call for a new law in the Modern Slavery Act, when it's looked at again, why do you think we need to change our laws to deal with that? Because surely there are ways to deal with it now, are there not?
Yeah, so the Centre for Social Justice unit that I'm part of is actually a joint project with a frontline anti-slavery charity, Justice and Care. And this first came to our attention from our frontline Justice and Care colleagues working embedded with police forces. And it was their police colleagues who were saying, we're going into these homes, we're identifying that someone's been exploited. But when we take this to the CPS, they're saying we can't charge this exploitation under the Modern Slavery Act. So we followed this up and got in touch with the CPS. And it seems to be the case that if there's no other exploitation happening, no other kind of labour required of the person, only that their home has been taken over and maybe they've been, forced into one room, they've been threatened and so on, that doesn't actually fit within the definitions in the Modern Slavery Act. And you can use drugs offences if other drugs offences are taking place. You can use organised crime offences. But none of those reflect the exploitation and the harm done to the individual. None of them recognise that person as a victim. And we think that the law should correct that. Of course, slavery always evolves and it doesn't actually have to be another offence. There could be some other purpose that's being used. It doesn't have the same level of seriousness for sentence that would be available for slavery.
And I suppose I was a bit shocked that often, or sometimes, it's the victim that gets prosecuted because he's allowed his house to be used as somewhere to place drugs or to have prostitutes maybe as well. And I mean, that's very concerning because that person has been forced into that under duress, and yet they're the ones that are targeted.
Exactly. And I think that's where, if we've got police who know about this and who are well trained, they can spot that and they can identify it. But not all of our police are familiar with the modern slavery laws and so on. And when they go to look at charges, it's really obvious that there's something on the statute book that the victim has committed. It's not obvious that they've been a victim of a crime themselves. Yeah,
so I suppose as well, if there was an offence, it would highlight this issue because apparently it has been in some recent police dramas highlighted, in Happy Valley, for example. But this would really highlight it if it had its own piece of legislation, wouldn't it?
Exactly. It would bring it to the attention of every police officer who's involved in prosecuting these crimes. We also think it would enable us to use some other aspects to help support victims, to bring it to greater attention.
Just before we finish, how widespread is this practice across the UK? I mean, is it something we should be concerned about as citizens?
I think so. I think it's growing. We did some polling for our report that we just published last week, which found that 1 in 8 of the adults we polled had seen signs of cuckooing in their community, which is really quite high. Last year, the police did a week of action, just 1 week in March last year, and they said they visited 800 properties in 1 week. Unfortunately, though, we don't exactly know how widespread it is because there's no offence. There's no data being collected in a systematic way. So we asked police forces across the country, and only 7 of them could give us any data at all about the number of cuckooing victims or offenders they'd encountered.
Yeah, I suppose maybe with a highlight on a high-profile series like Happy Valley, maybe others will start to think about that and to come forward as well. But Louise, thank you for coming into the studio.